He tossed the divorce papers across the mahogany desk, smirking at the woman in the cheap beige cardigan who had supported him for a decade. "I'm taking the company public, Charlotte. I've outgrown you, and frankly, you don't fit into my world anymore," he sneered, tossing her a pen. He thought he was cutting dead weight to build his empire. What Nathaniel didn't know was that the very empire he was so proud of was secretly funded by the woman sitting across from him, and by signing that paper, he had just signed his own financial death warrant. Nathaniel Harrington was a man who believed his own myth. At 34, he was the golden boy of Silicon Valley, the brilliant CEO, and founder of Omnitech Solutions, an artificial intelligence logistics firm currently valued at just over $9 billion. He had the sharp jawline, the custom Italian suits from Brioni, and the cover of Forbes framed in his sprawling, glass-walled office overlooking the San Francisco skyline. In Nathaniel's mind, he had built his empire from the ground up through sheer grit, sleepless nights, and unparalleled genius. He had clawed his way out of a middle-class upbringing in Ohio, pitched his heart out to venture capitalists on Sand Hill Road, and manifested his destiny. And then there was Charlotte. Charlotte was his wife of 10 years. They had met at a small liberal arts college before Nathaniel's meteoric rise. Back then, she was a quiet, unassuming literature major with a penchant for oversized sweaters, messy buns, and spending her weekends reading in the campus library. She was sweet, grounded, and fiercely loyal. When Nathaniel was eating instant ramen and coding his first disastrous app in a cramped apartment, Charlotte was the one paying the rent, brewing the coffee, and telling him to never give up. But as Omnitech grew, so did Nathaniel's ego. He began to view his life through the lens of a corporate merger, evaluating assets and liabilities. And in his newly minted, hyper-elitist world, Charlotte had become a liability. She didn't care about the gala dinners at the MoMA, or rubbing elbows with executives from JP Morgan and Sequoia Capital. While other tech wives wore Van Cleef and Arpels and drove Mercedes G-Wagons around Atherton, Charlotte drove a 5-year-old Volvo and preferred shopping at local farmers' markets. She was practically invisible in his high-stakes world, a relic of a past he was desperate to leave behind. Nathaniel's growing disdain was fueled heavily by Victoria Hastings, Omnitech's newly appointed Vice President of Global Communications. Victoria was everything Charlotte wasn't: ruthless, razor-sharp, heavily manicured, and exceptionally well-connected in the venture capital sphere. She wore Tom Ford stilettos, drank dry martinis, and knew exactly how to stroke Nathaniel's ego. "You're a visionary, Nate," Victoria murmured one evening, tracing the rim of her crystal glass at an exclusive mixer in Manhattan, where Omnitech was wooing late-stage investors. "But every visionary needs a partner who understands the view from the top. Charlotte, she's sweet, but she's holding you back. When we take Omnitech public, the media will scrutinize every aspect of your life. They want a power couple, not a billionaire and a housewife." Nathaniel had sipped his Macallan 25, his eyes drifting over the glittering New York skyline. Victoria's words were poison, but to Nathaniel, they tasted like the absolute truth. He looked at Victoria, sleek, predatory, and ambitious, and made his decision. He didn't notice the quiet, subtle ways Charlotte had orchestrated his success behind the scenes for years. He never questioned why the notoriously ruthless anchor investor from the Wellington Garrison Group, a secretive private equity firm in London, had suddenly decided to seed his Series A round when 20 other firms had laughed him out of the room. He never wondered why the cutthroat suppliers in Taiwan gave Omnitech priority during global chip shortages. He thought it was his brilliant negotiation tactics. He thought it was his charm. He had no idea that Charlotte's maiden name wasn't just a random middle-class surname. She was born Charlotte Kensington. Her father, Arthur Kensington, was the reclusive patriarch of a European-American syndicate whose generational wealth dwarfed the GDP of small nations. The Kensingtons didn't appear on the Forbes list because they owned the debt of the people who did. Arthur Kensington controlled a shadow network of hedge funds, real estate conglomerates, and deep tech holding companies worth over $2 trillion. Charlotte had fled that suffocating world of immense pressure, armed bodyguards and transactional relationships to live a normal life. When she fell in love with Nathaniel, she swore her father to secrecy, demanding he let her live as a commoner. But Arthur, ever the protective titan, had quietly instructed his asset managers to ensure his daughter's husband succeeded. Every lucky break, every miracle investor, every inexplicably perfect market condition Omnitech faced had been orchestrated by a single phone call from a Swiss estate, simply to keep Charlotte happy. But Charlotte's happiness had been steadily dying for 3 years. She saw the late nights Nathaniel spent at the office. She smelled the expensive Le Labo perfume on his collars. She felt the chill in his gaze when he looked at her. The final straw came during Nathaniel's 34th birthday dinner at the French Laundry. Charlotte had spent weeks tracking down a rare first-edition copy of his favorite childhood book, beautifully restored. She presented it to him quietly at the table. Nathaniel had glanced at the old, slightly frayed book, a look of unmistakable embarrassment crossing his face as Victoria, who had brazenly invited herself to the intimate dinner, let out a stifled, mocking laugh. "Oh, how vintage," Victoria had purred, handing Nathaniel her gift, the keys to a custom 1969 Jaguar E-Type. Nathaniel hadn't even opened the book. He had pushed it aside, his eyes shining as he looked at Victoria. "Now this," he said loudly, making sure the surrounding tables heard, "is a gift that understands where I'm going." Charlotte had sat there, her hands resting quietly in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply watched the man she had loved completely erase her from his future. At that moment, the warm, supportive wife died, and the daughter of Arthur Kensington woke up. 3 weeks later, Nathaniel called Charlotte into his office at Omnitech headquarters. It was a power move, plain and simple. He didn't want to do this at their shared penthouse in Pacific Heights. He wanted home field advantage. He wanted her to feel small amid the towering glass, the sleek, minimalist furniture, and the buzz of his billion-dollar empire. When Charlotte arrived, wearing a simple navy blouse and tailored trousers, she was guided into the executive suite by an assistant who wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Nathaniel was sitting behind his massive desk, Victoria hovering near the window, looking out over the city with a smug, proprietary air. On the desk lay a thick stack of legal documents. "Have a seat, Charlotte," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying the practiced, calm authority he used in board meetings. Charlotte didn't sit. She stood near the door, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes drifting from Nathaniel to Victoria and then to the papers. "What is this, Nate?" "It's time we face reality," Nathaniel began, steepling his fingers. "Omnitech is preparing for an IPO next quarter. We're going to be under a microscope. My life is moving at a velocity you can't match. We want different things. You want quiet weekends and farmers' markets. I want to change the world. It's not fair to either of us to drag this out." "You're leaving me," Charlotte stated. Her voice was entirely devoid of the panic or heartbreak Nathaniel had anticipated. "I'm restructuring my life," he corrected, a cold corporate euphemism that made Victoria smirk. I've had my legal team draft a very generous settlement. The prenup we signed when you had $6,000 to your name. Charlotte interrupted softly. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Yes, and according to it, you are entitled to virtually nothing of Omnitech. However, because I am not a cruel man, and because I appreciate the early years, I am offering you a lump sum of $2 million. You also get to keep the vacation house in Tahoe. It's more than enough for you to live comfortably, provided you sign the non-disclosure agreement. I can't have you going to the press and painting yourself as a victim. $2 million to a man worth $9 billion. It was a calculated insult. $2 million, Charlotte echoed. She walked slowly toward the desk. It's a more than fair transition fund, Charlotte. Victoria chimed in, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. Nate built this company with his own bare hands. It wouldn't be right for you to lay claim to his genius just because you were there when he started. Charlotte turned her head, slowly, fixing Victoria with a stare so chilling, so utterly devoid of warmth, that the PR executive instinctively took a step back. It wasn't the look of a scorned housewife. It was the look of an apex predator assessing a deeply insignificant insect. Victoria, Charlotte said softly, you should be careful when you speak about things you don't understand. The foundation of this building is much more fragile than you think. She turned back to Nathaniel. He looked impatient, tapping a gold Mont Blanc pen against the desk. Sign the papers, Charlotte. Let's make this clean. Don't make me tie you up in litigation for the next 5 years. You don't have the capital to fight my lawyers. Charlotte looked down at the divorce decree. She saw the absolute arrogance in Nathaniel's eyes. He truly believed he was a god among men. He truly believed she was nothing but a stepping stone he had successfully leaped across. Are you absolutely certain about this, Nathaniel? Charlotte asked, using his full name. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. Once I sign this, our lives are entirely severed. You will stand entirely on your own. There is no going back. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Nathaniel scoffed. I don't need a crutch anymore. I am self-made. It's time I act like it. A ghost of a smile touched Charlotte's lips. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. Self-made. Right. She picked up the Mont Blanc pen. She didn't read the documents. She didn't flip through the clauses or the brutal NDA. She simply flipped to the last page, pressed the nib to the paper, and signed Charlotte Kensington in elegant, sweeping cursive. Not Harrington. Kensington. She dropped the pen. It clattered loudly against the quiet mahogany. It's done, she said, turning toward the door. Nathaniel exhaled, a massive breath of relief and triumph. My assistant will have the $2 million wired to your account by Friday. I expect you out of the penthouse by the end of the week. Charlotte paused at the door, her hand on the silver handle. She didn't look back. Keep the $2 million, Nathaniel. You're going to need every single penny to pay your legal fees. Before he could process the strange remark, the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her. Victoria let out a theatrical sigh, walking over to wrap her arms around Nathaniel's shoulders. Good riddance. She was practically vibrating with jealousy. Now we can focus on the IPO. The Goldman Sachs underwriter is flying in tomorrow. Nathaniel smiled, pulling Victoria into a kiss. He felt lighter, invincible. The last chain holding him to the ground had just been severed. He was ready to fly. He didn't know he had just stepped off a cliff. 48 hours later, the celebration was in full swing. Nathaniel had rented out the entire rooftop of the Battery Club in San Francisco. Champagne flowed freely among the city's elite. Angel investors, tech journalists, and Omnitech executives. The air buzzed with the electric anticipation of Omnitech's impending initial public offering. Projections estimated the stock would open at a premium, instantly solidifying Nathaniel's status as a deca-billionaire. Victoria was glued to his side, wearing a stunning scarlet Carolina Herrera gown, expertly working the room, introducing Nathaniel to political figures and media moguls. Everything was perfect. The divorce had been processed with lightning speed, a little too fast, though Nathaniel didn't question it. He assumed his high-priced lawyers had simply fast-tracked the paperwork through the local courts. At 9:45 p.m., Nathaniel's phone vibrated in his tuxedo pocket. He ignored it. It vibrated again. And again. Frowning, he pulled it out. It was David Arris, his chief financial officer. David was at the party, standing near the bar. But when Nathaniel looked over, David's face was completely drained of color. The CFO was staring at his own tablet, looking physically ill. Nathaniel excused himself from a conversation with a state senator and walked over. "David, what's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. Drink some champagne. We're about to ring the bell next month." "Nate," David whispered, his voice trembling. "We need to go to a private room. Now." Annoyed, Nathaniel led his CFO into an empty private dining alcove, away from the music. "Make it quick. The Goldman people are—" "Goldman just pulled out," David blurted out. Nathaniel froze. The air in his lungs seemed to evaporate. "Excuse me. That's impossible. We signed the underwriting agreement on Tuesday. They are legally bound. They invoked a material adverse change clause," David said, his hands shaking as he held up the tablet, showing a terrifyingly brief email from Goldman Sachs's lead partner. "Nate, it's not just them. It's Wellington Garrison. Wellington Garrison Group, Omnitech's massive anchor investor. The London-based private equity behemoth that owned 40% of Omnitech's private shares. They were the rock upon which Nathaniel's entire valuation was built." "What about Wellington?" Nathaniel demanded, his voice rising in panic. "Call Richard at Wellington. Get him on the phone." I tried. Richard was fired an hour ago. David swallowed hard. "Nate, Wellington Garrison just dumped their entire stake in Omnitech, all of it. They sold their shares back to the corporate treasury at a massive loss, entirely dissolving their board seats. They are completely divesting from us." "That makes no sense," Nathaniel roared, pacing the small room. "Firms don't just dump 40% of a $9 billion unicorn a month before an IPO. It's financial suicide. Why would they do that?" "It gets worse," David said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The moment Wellington pulled out, the ripple effect hit the algorithms. Apex Capital just froze our credit lines. Our Taiwanese microchip suppliers just sent a notice terminating our exclusivity contract, citing investor instability. "Nate, in the last 30 minutes, our private valuation has dropped by 60%. We don't have enough liquid cash to cover next month's server farm leases without the credit lines." Nathaniel felt the room spinning. It was impossible. A flawlessly executing company couldn't just spontaneously implode in 30 minutes. It felt like a coordinated surgical strike. It felt like someone had flipped a master switch and turned off his entire life support system. "Who gave the order?" Nathaniel demanded, grabbing David by the lapels. "Who at Wellington authorized this?" I got a back-channel message from a junior analyst over there," David stammered. "He said the order didn't come from the board. It came from the parent syndicate, the ultimate shadow owners." Who? Kensington Giles, David whispered. The $1 trillion whale. Nate, no one ever crosses Kensington. If they gave the order to burn Omnitech, the rest of Wall Street will treat us like radioactive waste by tomorrow morning. Nathaniel let go of David, staggering back. Kensington. He didn't know anyone at Kensington. He hadn't offended any old money billionaires. He didn't even interact with that tier of global wealth. While Nathaniel was hyperventilating in a private room in San Francisco, 3,000 miles away in New York, a very different scene was unfolding. At a private terminal at Teterboro Airport, a sleek, unmarked Gulfstream G650ER sat waiting on the tarmac. A motorcade of 3 black armored Range Rovers pulled up to the steps. The door of the lead vehicle opened, and a man in a bespoke suit, Harrison, the chief legal fixer for the Kensington family, stepped out, holding an umbrella to block the light drizzle. Charlotte stepped out of the car. She was no longer wearing the oversized sweaters or the cheap beige cardigans. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored Alexander McQueen power suit, a vintage Cartier Panther watch gleaming on her wrist. Her posture was commanding, her eyes sharp and cold. "Welcome back, Miss Kensington," Harrison said smoothly, bowing his head slightly. "Your father is eager to see you in London." "Thank you, Harrison," Charlotte replied, her voice ringing with natural, undeniable authority. "Did the directives go through?" "Flawlessly, ma'am," Harrison smiled, a deeply dangerous curve of his lips. "Wellington has fully divested. Goldman has pulled the IPO. The suppliers have severed ties. By tomorrow morning, Nathaniel Harrington's net worth will exist entirely in the negative." Charlotte paused at the bottom of the plane's stairs, looking out into the dark, rainy night. For 10 years, she had played the fool. She had allowed a mediocre man with a massive ego to believe he was a king, simply because she had been holding up his throne from underneath. He wanted to be self-made. "Good," Charlotte said softly, ascending the stairs into the private jet. "Let's see how well he builds an empire when he's the one buying the bricks." The next 72 hours in Silicon Valley would be studied in MBA crisis management courses for a decade. The collapse of Omnitech Solutions was not a gradual decline. It was a vertical drop into the abyss. By 6 a.m. on Monday, the Bloomberg terminal in David Aris's office was bleeding red. The news of Goldman Sachs pulling out of the IPO had leaked to the Wall Street Journal, which published a scathing front-page exclusive citing catastrophic internal irregularities and a complete loss of institutional faith. Nathaniel paced his glass-walled office like a caged animal. His Brioni suit was crumpled, his tie discarded, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. He had spent the entire weekend making frantic phone calls to every venture capital firm on Sand Hill Road. Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia Capital, Benchmark, firms that had been begging to get in on Omnitech's Series C funding just 6 months ago, were suddenly unreachable. Their partners were conveniently on vacation or in board meetings. "We need a bridge loan," Nathaniel barked, slamming his fist onto the mahogany desk. "Just $50 million to keep the server farms operational and the payroll covered until I can secure a new underwriter. Victoria, where is the press release? We need to control the narrative. Tell them Goldman Sachs lacked the vision for our new AI integration." Victoria Hastings was sitting on the edge of the leather sofa, but she looked entirely different from the predatory, confident woman she had been at the Battery Club. She was staring at her phone, her face pale, frantically typing messages. "Victoria, are you listening to me?" Nathaniel snapped. She looked up, her expression hardening. "I'm not putting out a press release, Nate. There is no narrative to control. The Financial Times just ran an op-ed calling Omnitech the next WeWork. The PR firm I retained for the IPO launch just dropped us because their retainer bounced. Then we pay them out of pocket, Nathaniel yelled. David, the CFO, walked into the office. He looked as though he had aged 10 years over the weekend. He dropped a thick red folder onto Nathaniel's desk. We can't pay them out of pocket, Nate, and you can't pay them out of your personal accounts either. Nathaniel froze. What are you talking about? I have $150 million in personal liquidity at JP Morgan Chase. You had $150 million, David corrected, his voice hollow. Nate, did you even read the covenants on your personal margin loans? You collateralized your private Omnitech shares to buy the Pacific Heights penthouse, the yacht in Cabo, and the private jet fractional ownership. When Wellington Garrison dumped their shares, our internal valuation plummeted below the margin call threshold. Nathaniel felt a cold sweat break out across his neck. No, they have to give me 30 days to post additional collateral. They don't when the lead investor liquidates their entire position overnight, David said quietly. JP Morgan exercised the seizure clause at 4 a.m. They've frozen your accounts. They are seizing the penthouse, the cars, everything. You are personally liable for $80 million in debt that your shares can no longer cover. The silence in the office was deafening. The golden boy of Silicon Valley, the self-made genius, was mathematically bankrupt. Victoria stood up, smoothing the skirt of her designer dress. She picked up her Hermes Birkin bag. "Where are you going?" Nathaniel asked, his voice suddenly small. "We have an emergency board meeting in 20 minutes. "You have an emergency board meeting," Victoria corrected, her tone as cold as absolute zero. "I am resigning, effective immediately." Nathaniel stared at her, genuinely, entirely bewildered. "You can't leave. You're my partner. We're in this together. You said we were going to rule this city." Victoria let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "I said I was going to rule this city with a billionaire visionary, not a bankrupt fraud who leveraged his entire life on paper money. Do you have any idea what being associated with this disaster does to my career? I have a reputation to protect." "I left my wife for you," Nathaniel shouted, the desperation finally breaking through his arrogant facade. Victoria paused at the door, looking back at him with pure, unadulterated pity. "No, Nate. You left your wife because you're a narcissist who wanted a trophy that looked good on a red carpet. I was just the mirror you used to admire yourself. Good luck with the bankruptcy." She walked out, the click of her stilettos echoing down the hallway, leaving Nathaniel entirely alone in the collapsing ruins of his empire. Desperate, Nathaniel left the office and drove to the regional headquarters of Lazard, the prestigious investment bank. He managed to secure a pity meeting with a senior managing director he had played golf with a month prior. Sitting in the sterile, air-conditioned conference room, Nathaniel pitched his heart out. He talked about his algorithms, his coding genius, his vision for the future of global logistics. The banker, an older, ruthless veteran of the markets, listened patiently before sliding Nathaniel's pitch deck back across the table. "It's a beautiful system, Nathaniel. Truly. The code is elegant," the banker said softly. "But you are suffering from a fundamental misunderstanding of why you were successful." "My tech is the best in the market," Nathaniel insisted. "Tech is cheap. Capital is expensive," the banker replied bluntly. "Do you honestly believe 20 major venture firms fought over you 3 years ago because of an algorithm? Nathaniel, we didn't invest in you. We invested in the shadow guarantee." Nathaniel blinked. "What guarantee?" "Whenever you walked into a room to ask for funding, an invisible hand had already cleared the path," the banker explained, leaning forward, Wellington Garrison backed you. And Wellington is a proxy for old, deep, terrifying European money. The market assumed that whoever you were, the apex predators of global finance had chosen to protect you. We invested because we knew they would never let you fail. But now, the invisible hand hasn't just stopped protecting you. It has actively ordered your execution. And no one on Wall Street is going to step in front of that firing squad for you. Nathaniel was escorted out of the building by security. He stood on the sidewalk in the blazing California sun, his chest tight, his breathing shallow. The invisible hand. Who? Who had he angered? Who had he crossed? He had to find out. While Nathaniel Harrington was being locked out of his penthouse by bank receivers, a matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the wrought-iron gates of a sprawling, heavily guarded estate in Mayfair, London. Charlotte stepped out into the crisp English air. The gravel crunched under her Louboutins, a stark contrast to the worn sneakers she used to wear to the San Francisco farmers' markets. The heavy oak doors of the manor opened, and standing in the grand foyer was Arthur Kensington. Even in his late 60s, the patriarch of the Kensington Giles Syndicate possessed a terrifying gravitational presence. He didn't look like a grandfather. He looked like a sovereign. Arthur's stern face cracked into a rare, warm smile. He stepped forward and wrapped his daughter in a tight embrace. "Welcome home, Charlie." "It's good to be back, Father," Charlotte murmured, breathing in the familiar scent of old wood, parchment, and expensive cigar smoke. Arthur pulled back, looking her up and down, noting the sharp cut of her suit and the cold fire in her eyes. The quiet, bookish girl who had fled the family business 10 years ago was gone. The woman standing before him was a Kensington, through and through. "I take it the American experiment is officially concluded?" Arthur asked, leading her into his massive private study, where a fire crackled in a massive stone hearth. "It is," Charlotte said, taking a seat in a leather wing-back chair. She accepted a glass of neat scotch from her father. "I apologize for the capital loss on the Wellington divestment. I know dumping those shares cost the syndicate." Arthur waved a hand dismissively. "A drop in the ocean. The loss is a tax write-off. Besides, watching that arrogant little upstart burn to ash was worth every penny. For 10 years, I watched him treat you like an accessory, while I secretly built his throne. The restraint it took not to crush him 3 years ago, when he started working late, was agonizing." Charlotte took a slow sip of the scotch. The burn grounded her. For a decade, she had tried to believe in the goodness of an ordinary life. She had tried to nurture Nathaniel's potential, believing that love and support could overcome ambition and greed. She had been wrong. Nathaniel hadn't loved her. He had loved what she provided, stability, when he had none. The moment he acquired his own power, he had discarded her like trash. The divorce papers are signed. The NDA is voided by his breach of the morality clauses, and he is fully isolated, Charlotte said, setting the glass down. Her voice was pure steel. "Father, I'm ready." Arthur's eyes gleamed with pride. "The managing director seat at Kensington Giles Europe has been empty since your uncle retired. The board has been begging me to appoint an outsider. I told them my daughter was simply on a sabbatical." "Tell the board their wait is over," Charlotte commanded. "And Father, have our acquisitions team look into Omnitech's IP portfolio. Once the company files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy next week, their proprietary logistics algorithm will go to auction for pennies. Buy it through a shell company. It's actually a brilliant piece of software. It's just wasted in the hands of a fool." "Consider it done," Arthur smiled. Back in San Francisco, Nathaniel was living out of a mid-tier Marriott hotel near the airport, paid for by the last dregs of a forgotten emergency credit card. His life was entirely unrecognizable. Omnitech's stock was worthless. The board had officially ousted him as CEO to appease the creditors. He was facing multiple lawsuits for fiduciary negligence. He sat in the dark hotel room, illuminated only by the glow of his laptop. For 3 weeks, he had been obsessed with one question: why? He had hired a disgraced former forensic accountant named Gregory, paying him with a vintage Rolex Daytona he had managed to hide from the bank. Gregory's job was to trace the kill order. Nathaniel needed to know which billionaire he had supposedly offended. At 11 p.m., there was a frantic knock on the hotel room door. Nathaniel unlocked it, and Gregory pushed his way inside, clutching a thick manila envelope. The accountant looked terrified. "I found it, Harrington," Gregory panted, dropping the envelope onto the cheap veneer desk. "And you need to pay me back the Rolex, because I am taking the first flight to Tokyo tomorrow. I can't be anywhere near this." "Who was it?" Nathaniel demanded, tearing open the envelope. "The order to liquidate Wellington Garrison's stake didn't come from their board," Gregory explained rapidly, pacing the room. "It was a direct mandate from their parent syndicate, Kensington Giles. It's a European wealth management monolith. They control everything from sovereign debt to global shipping lanes." "I know who Kensington is," Nathaniel snapped, pulling out stacks of financial routing documents. "But why did they target me? I don't know anyone at Kensington Giles." "Look at the final document," Gregory whispered, pointing to a high-gloss magazine cutout buried at the bottom of the pile. The order wasn't signed by Arthur Kensington. He transferred executive authority of their American tech portfolio to the new managing director the exact morning you got served. Nathaniel pulled the glossy page free. It was a clipping from the Society and Business section of the Financial Times, dated 2 days after he had forced Charlotte to sign the divorce papers. The headline read, "The heiress returns. Charlotte Kensington assumes control of $2 trillion, syndicate following, decade-long sabbatical." Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. His vision blurred, the edges of the room turning dark. Beneath the headline was a high-resolution photograph taken at a gala in Mayfair. There she was. She wasn't wearing a cheap beige cardigan. She was draped in custom haute couture, a diamond necklace worth more than Omnitech's highest valuation resting against her collarbone. She looked regal, terrifying, and completely untouchable. She was standing next to Arthur Kensington, looking directly into the camera with the exact same cold, dead-eyed stare she had given him in his office when she told him to keep the $2 million. "Keep the $2 million, Nathaniel. You're going to need every single penny to pay your legal fees." The memory hit him like a physical blow. Charlotte Kensington, she had signed on the divorce decree. He hadn't even noticed the name change. He had been too busy looking at Victoria. Nathaniel collapsed into the cheap hotel chair, the magazine clipping slipping from his trembling fingers. The invisible hand, the miraculous funding, the suppliers bending over backward, the absolute ease with which he had conquered Silicon Valley. It hadn't been his genius. It hadn't been his undeniable talent. He was a houseplant that had been meticulously watered and kept in a greenhouse, and the moment he had bitten the hand that fed him, she had simply turned off the sun. He let out a sound, a pathetic, broken noise that was half sob, half laugh. He had thrown away a $1 trillion empire, and the only woman who had ever truly protected him, all for a fleeting moment of ego. He was completely, utterly destroyed, and the architect of his ruin was the woman he had dismissed as irrelevant. Desperation is a powerful, degrading force. It strips away the veneer of pride leaving only the raw, frantic instinct to survive. For Nathaniel Harrington, desperation manifested as a maxed-out Delta Sky Miles account and a middle-seat economy ticket on a red-eye flight from San Francisco to London Heathrow. He didn't sleep during the 11-hour flight. He stared at the back of the seat in front of him, rehearsing what he was going to say. He would apologize. He would fall to his knees if he had to. He would remind Charlotte of the early days, the cramped apartment, the late-night pizza, the vows they had taken. Surely the woman who had spent a decade making sure he succeeded couldn't simply switch off her feelings overnight. She was angry, yes. She had proven her point. She had crushed him to show her power. But now, he was humbled. Now, he would beg for mercy, and maybe, just maybe, she would reinstate his life. It was raining when he landed in London. He didn't have the funds for an Uber Black, so he took the tube to the financial district, his cheap suit damp and clinging to his shoulders. The European headquarters of Kensington Giles wasn't a flashy, glass-walled tech startup. It was an imposing, brutalist skyscraper of dark granite and smoked glass that dominated the skyline, looking more like a fortress of global capitalism than a corporate office. There was no giant logo on the building, just a discreet brass plaque by the revolving doors. Nathaniel walked into the cavernous marble lobby, feeling instantly microscopic. Security guards in tailored suits, ex-military, judging by their posture, eyed him with immediate suspicion. He approached the monolithic reception desk. "I need to see Charlotte Kensington." The receptionist, an immaculate woman with a cold, aristocratic gaze, didn't even type on her keyboard. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "Tell her it's Nathaniel. Tell her it's her husband." He clung to the word, a pathetic life raft. The receptionist pressed a discreet button on her earpiece. She murmured something too low for Nathaniel to hear. A moment later, two of the security guards stepped up behind him. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises," one of the guards said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "No, call her! Tell her I'm here!" Nathaniel shouted, his voice echoing off the marble. "Charlotte, I know you're up there." He expected to be tackled and thrown onto the rainy pavement. But suddenly, the receptionist's earpiece crackled again. She paused, her eyes widening fractionally, before she looked back at Nathaniel. "Security, stand down," the receptionist ordered smoothly. She gestured to a private elevator bank. "Car 4, Mr. Harrington. The top floor." Nathaniel felt a surge of triumphant relief. She wants to see me. She still cares. The elevator ride was silent and frighteningly fast. When the doors slid open, Nathaniel stepped into a world of wealth that made his former life look like a child's imitation. The executive suite was lined with genuine Renaissance masterpieces, dark mahogany wainscoting, and floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass overlooking the sprawling grey expanse of London. At the far end of the room, behind a desk carved from a single slab of petrified wood, sat Charlotte. She was wearing a charcoal, double-breasted Tom Ford suit, her hair pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. She didn't look up when he entered. She was signing a stack of documents with a platinum fountain pen. Standing near the window, holding a tablet, was a figure that made Nathaniel's heart physically stop in his chest. Victoria Hastings. She was wearing a sharp cream blouse, her signature stilettos, and an air of absolute belonging. Nathaniel stopped dead in his tracks, his wet shoes squeaking against the polished hardwood floor. He looked from Charlotte to Victoria, his brain completely short-circuiting. "Victoria," Nathaniel whispered. "What? What are you doing here?" Victoria looked up from her tablet, offering him a perfectly polite, entirely lifeless corporate smile. Good morning, Nathaniel. Please don't drip on the Persian rug. It's a 16th century antique. Charlotte finally set her pen down. She folded her hands on the desk, looking at him. There was no anger in her eyes. There was no lingering affection. There was only the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a dying specimen in a petri dish. "Hello, Nathaniel. To what do I owe this rather pathetic intrusion?" Charlotte asked, her voice echoing softly in the massive room. You hired her?" Nathaniel choked out, pointing a trembling finger at Victoria. "After everything she did? After she ruined our marriage? You hired her?" Charlotte let out a low, amused breath. "Nathaniel, you truly have an inflated sense of your own narrative. Victoria didn't ruin our marriage. Your towering ego and chronic inadequacy ruined our marriage. Victoria simply provided the mirror you were so desperate to look into." Charlotte leaned back in her leather chair. "When Omnitech began to collapse, I needed a senior director of global communications for our European tech portfolio. Victoria is ruthless, highly competent, and devoid of moral sentiment. She is exactly the kind of apex predator Kensington Giles employs. I offered her quadruple what you were paying her, along with a signing bonus that eclipsed your entire net worth." Victoria didn't even look embarrassed. She simply tapped a stylus against her tablet. "It was purely a business decision, Nate. You were a sinking ship with zero liquidity. Charlotte offered me a seat on a dreadnought. Everyone has a price. You just couldn't afford mine anymore." Nathaniel felt his knees buckle. The absolute humiliation of it all crashed down on him. The woman he had left his wife for was now happily working for the very wife who had orchestrated his destruction. It was a checkmate so profound, so flawlessly executed, that he couldn't even formulate a response. He abandoned his anger. He abandoned his pride. He fell to his knees on the edge of the antique rug. "Charlotte, please," he begged, his voice cracking, tears finally spilling hot down his cheeks. "Please. I'm sorry. I was blinded by the money, by the pressure. I forgot who I was. I forgot who built me. I know I was a fool. But 10 years, Charlotte. You loved me for 10 years. You can't just throw that away. Take me back. I don't care about the company. I don't care about the money. Just give me another chance." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the constant hum of the city outside seemed to fade away. Charlotte stood up slowly. She walked around the massive desk, her heels clicking against the floor. She stopped a few feet away from where Nathaniel was kneeling. She looked down at him, her expression colder than the London rain. "Do you remember what you said to me when you handed me those divorce papers?" she asked softly. Nathaniel sobbed, shaking his head. "You said, 'I don't need a crutch anymore. I am self-made. It's time I act like it.'" Charlotte's voice was a razor blade slicing through the quiet room. "I am simply honoring your wishes, Nathaniel. You wanted to be self-made. You wanted to stand on your own 2 feet, free from my limitations. Well, here you are. You are entirely, beautifully self-made. Every piece of ruin you are experiencing right now is something you built with your own 2 hands. "I'll do anything," he pleaded, grasping at the hem of her trousers. She stepped back, cleanly avoiding his touch. "There is nothing you can do. You have nothing I want. You possess no leverage, no capital, and no value," Charlotte stated, delivering the final, fatal blow to his ego. "You were a charity project, Nathaniel. A stray dog I fed because I felt sorry for you. And when the dog bit me, I simply stopped buying the food. You aren't a tragedy. You're just a poor investment I finally decided to write off. She turned away from him, walking back to her desk. Victoria, please have security escort Mr. Harrington out and ensure he is blacklisted from all Kensington Giles properties globally. His presence is depressing. Right away, Miss Kensington, Victoria replied efficiently, pressing the intercom. Two massive security guards appeared instantly from a concealed side door. They grabbed Nathaniel by the armpits, lifting him off the ground like a rag doll. "Charlotte, please!" Nathaniel screamed, thrashing against the guards as they dragged him backward toward the elevator. "You can't leave me with nothing. Charlotte." Charlotte didn't even look up as the elevator doors slid shut, cutting off his frantic screams. She simply picked up her platinum pen, dipped it in the inkwell, and signed the next billion-dollar acquisition contract on her desk. 6 months later, the dust had settled, and the landscape of the global tech industry had been fundamentally rewritten. Omnitech Solutions filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy. In the ensuing liquidation auction, a shadowy holding company based in the Cayman Islands purchased the entirety of Omnitech's proprietary logistics algorithms for a mere fraction of a penny on the dollar, a humiliating $14 million. The tech press mourned the loss of a unicorn, citing it as a cautionary tale of hubris, over-leveraging, and terrible market timing. Nobody connected the dots to Kensington Giles. The trillion-dollar syndicate was a ghost, operating entirely in the dark, moving markets without ever leaving a fingerprint. Once the algorithm was secured, it was integrated into Kensington Giles's massive global shipping network. The efficiency protocol Nathaniel had written in his 20s, the one he thought would make his name immortal, ended up revolutionizing the European supply chain. It generated an estimated $4 billion in added revenue for the Kensington family in the first quarter alone. It was hailed as a masterpiece of corporate synergy. Nathaniel's name was quietly scrubbed from the patents in a flurry of aggressive corporate litigation. Nathaniel Harrington was currently living in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a dreary suburb of Columbus, Ohio. He shared the apartment with a roommate who worked night shifts at a local warehouse. Nathaniel's life was a brutal, exhausting cycle of gray mediocrity. After J.P. Morgan Chase had finished liquidating his assets to cover his margin calls, he was left with nothing but a staggering mountain of IRS penalties and residual legal fees. He was unhireable in Silicon Valley. His reputation was toxic, a radioactive warning sign to any venture capitalist or tech CEO. To survive, and to keep the debt collectors from seizing his wages, Nathaniel had been forced to take a mid-level quality assurance testing job for a regional logistics contractor. He spent 10 hours a day sitting in a gray cubicle under flickering fluorescent lights, staring at lines of code on a dusty monitor. His job was to run diagnostic tests on shipping routing software, looking for bugs in the delivery algorithms. The darkest, most agonizing irony of his existence was the software he was testing. The regional contractor he worked for was a low-tier subsidiary of a massive European shipping conglomerate. The software he spent all day testing, the software he had to fix menial bugs for, was his own algorithm. He was being paid $65,000 a year to do basic maintenance on the billion-dollar engine he had built with his own hands, an engine now entirely owned by his ex-wife. Every time he booted up the system, he saw the ghost of his own genius staring back at him, mocking him. It was a psychological torture designed with flawless precision. One cold Tuesday evening, Nathaniel sat alone in his apartment, eating cold ramen noodles from a styrofoam cup, a cruel echo of his college days. The heater in the apartment was broken, and he was wearing a cheap, fraying sweater to keep warm. He opened his cracked smartphone and pulled up the internet browser. He couldn't help himself. It was a toxic addiction he indulged in every single night. He typed Charlotte Kensington into the search bar. Instantly, the screen flooded with news articles, high-resolution photographs, and financial op-eds. Charlotte was on the cover of Forbes that month. The photograph was stunning. She was standing on the balcony of a chateau in the Swiss Alps, wearing a breathtaking bespoke emerald gown, holding a glass of champagne. Her posture was relaxed, her eyes burning with a terrifying, serene power. The headline read in bold golden letters, "The Empress of Capital. How Charlotte Kensington stepped out of the shadows to rule the global syndicate." The article detailed how, in just 6 months, she had ruthlessly restructured the family's European holdings, acquiring 3 major tech firms and crushing a hostile takeover bid from a rival hedge fund. The financial world was terrified of her. She was cold, calculating, and completely untouchable. Nathaniel scrolled down. There was a photo from a charity gala in Monaco. Charlotte was walking down the red carpet, surrounded by a swarm of paparazzi. Standing 2 steps behind her, wearing a sharp designer suit, holding a tablet and whispering into Charlotte's ear, was Victoria Hastings, the loyal, highly paid attack dog. Nathaniel stared at the screen, the cold ramen turning to ash in his mouth. He zoomed in on Charlotte's face. There was no trace of the quiet girl who used to read poetry to him. There was no trace of the woman who had suffered his arrogance in silence. The woman on the screen was a titan, and she had never needed him, not for a single second. He turned the phone off, letting it drop onto the cheap laminate table. He sat in the dark, shivering in the freezing apartment, listening to the wail of a distant police siren. The reality of his existence settled over him like a heavy, suffocating blanket. He hadn't just lost his company. He hadn't just lost his wealth. He had lost the only real thing in his life, entirely because he was too blind to see its value. Thousands of miles away, in the penthouse of a luxury hotel in Dubai, Charlotte Kensington stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering, neon-lit skyline of the desert city. The room was silent, save for the soft clinking of ice against crystal as she swirled a glass of incredibly rare bourbon. Her phone buzzed onto the glass coffee table behind her. It was a text from Harrison, the family's chief legal fixer. The final patents on the Omnitech algorithm have been successfully scrubbed and transferred to the Geneva Shell Company. Harrington has no legal recourse. The erasure is absolute. Charlotte read the message. A slow, terrifyingly beautiful smile touched her lips. She deleted the message, turned her phone off, and walked back to the window. She took a slow sip of the bourbon, letting the warmth settle in her chest. She didn't think about Nathaniel Harrington. She didn't think about the cramped apartment in Ohio, or the tears he had shed on her antique rug. He was a closed chapter, a line item on a ledger that had been zeroed out and archived. She looked out at the glowing city below her, a city built on money, power, and ruthless ambition. She raised her glass to the reflection in the window. The game was over, and the Queen had taken the board. Nathaniel's story is a brutal reminder that arrogance is the ultimate architect of ruin. He was so blinded by his own reflection that he failed to recognize the quiet, invisible foundation holding up his entire world. He chased a hollow illusion of power, discarding loyalty for prestige, only to discover that true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. Charlotte didn't just break his empire. She proved that the most dangerous enemies are the ones you fatally underestimate. If you loved this story of absolute revenge and corporate justice, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic tale of high-stakes vengeance.